Welcome back to Endgame community. We're here to help you out all of season long, and right now we're going to talk about a very popular topic: who's number one? And by that we mean at each position: quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. All the essentials in fantasy. Who do you think is going to finish as the top scorer? It might not be as obvious as you think. But let's start with running back. Chris, is it as obvious as we think? Who is your running back number one for the 2021 season?
Yes, it is as obvious as we think. It's Christian McCaffrey. I know we only saw him in 3 games last year, but guess what? In those 3 games, he was far and away better than every other player. And there's nothing that should make you worry that that's going to change this year. We've talked about the injuries over and over. It wasn't like a season-ending injury. It was just they were really careful with him. They didn't see any reason to bring him back. Should be fully healthy. Should be a full go. Yes, Christian McCaffrey, the obvious choice here.
Yeah, okay, so I can only think of 2 reasons why you might say Christian McCaffrey isn't the number one running back and player in fantasy. So number one is recency bias, which is an affliction that affects a lot of fantasy managers. Yeah, he wasn't the number one guy last year because he was hurt. Let's remember that it wasn't an ACL or an Achilles or anything devastating. It was just a nagging injury that the Panthers slow played and they kept him out because they didn't need him because they weren't going to be a playoff team anyways. So let's not forget that he was dominant with 2,400 total yards and 19 touchdowns the year before. Okay, no player approached that, and that is what he's capable of. Okay, the other reason is Sam Darnold. If you really think Sam Darnold is as terrible as he was in New York and he's going to bring this franchise and this offense down and just weigh it down, well, then, yeah, I guess you should be off McCaffrey to some extent. I don't think that's the case. And you know what? If he's that terrible, then they'll pull him and they'll get a different quarterback anyways. So it has to be McCaffrey number one for me. I could see that you have an argument for Dalvin Cook based on what he did last year. But look, Dalvin Cook's not getting 1,000 receiving yards. And McCaffrey definitely can. We know that. All right, let's move on to receiver. Now, Davante Adams is the consensus number one receiver based on the fact he was the number one receiver last year. Do you have Davante Adams or somebody else?
I mean, I do have Adams as the guy, but I can make a case for 4 or 5 guys here, right? I could see any one of Diggs, Metcalf, Tyreek Hill, Hopkins, maybe even Jefferson are really, but I don't feel as strongly about them. Any of those guys finishing number one. But for me, it's still got to be Adams because if you look at it, the guy missed 2 games last year. And if he wouldn't have missed those games, he probably almost with absolute certainty would have scored more fantasy points than Alvin Kamara in PPR leagues. So I know a lot of people are talking about, oh, he can't score that many touchdowns again. You're right. He probably can't score that many touchdowns again. But guess what? He doesn't need to because he was that far ahead of all the other wide receivers on a point per game basis. So if he plays all 16 or 17 games, whatever it is this year for fantasy, he will be the number one wide receiver. So sorry to be boring, but I'm going with Adams.
No need to apologize. You know what? I can't argue against Adams. I don't have him as my number one receiver, but not because I disagree with anything you just said. The only thing, of course, we know he's probably not going to score as many touchdowns, but I have him as my wide receiver too. That's all it means. And that's only because my number one receiver is a guy I've been in love with since before he came out for the draft, DK Metcalf. So here's the difference. Here's why I think Metcalf could take that leap to become the guy. Adams averages about 12 yards per catch, right? And a lot of what he does is because he has Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks in the league. But Aaron Rodgers had his best season statistically, especially in terms of touchdowns out of his long career. We know that's going to go down. Metcalf is tied to a pretty good quarterback himself, and Russell Wilson had kind of a down season based on the second half, but a lot of that's because the running game was ineffective. The running game should be back. They're going to get a healthy, hopefully, Chris Carson and Rashad Penny back, and they'll have more balance. Teams won't just be able to sit back and wait on the deep ball. Look, Metcalf saw his target share, his target total go from 100 to 129 in the second season. If that target total goes up again, this is a receiver who averages 15 yards per catch. My math tells me he'll get a lot more yards. He could outproduce Davante Adams in terms of yards. He could match him, if not outproduce him in terms of touchdowns. We know he's a big target, so I feel like Metcalf could take that next step. This guy's just getting better, all right? So as I think we're going to see a little bit of regression with Adams, I think we're going to see progress with Metcalf, and he's my guy for sure. All right, now what about the tight end position? I mean, it's Travis Kelce or bust, right? You got anybody different? You're going to give us a spicy take here?
No, definitely not. The only way Travis Kelce doesn't finish, I can only see two scenarios, I guess, where he doesn't finish as a tight end one. Scenario number one, he gets hurt and misses significant time. Scenario number two, Darren Waller or George Kittle have an all-time tight end season because he's tied to Patrick Mahomes. They didn't go out and draft pass catchers. It's Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce are like the 1A, 1B for Mahomes on this team. So no, again, only those two scenarios would he ever not be the number one tight end next year. So can't bank on either of those. It's definitely Travis Kelce.
It's clearly Travis Kelce. There's no way that it won't be Travis Kelce unless an injury is involved somewhere. So there's really not much to add here. I don't see anybody kind of stepping up and doing like what I mentioned with Metcalf, Kittle. There's a lot of questions there, whether he can even get back to what he did 2 years ago, even if he's healthy. Trey Lance at quarterback. I don't see it happening. I don't see any tight end approaching what Kelce did. He's still dominant week after week. It's Kelce, hands down. Don't try to convince yourself that it's anybody else because it shouldn't be. But at quarterback, maybe not so simple. Look, Pat Mahomes clearly could be the guy. But there's always some shift, right? There's always somebody who comes out with a breakout season, just like Mahomes did 3 years ago. There's some offenses that have made vast improvements. Who do you have as your quarterback one?
I have Kyler Murray as my QB1. And this guy was a QB1 before he suffered that shoulder injury last year. But the reason there's a few reasons I like him. Number one, he only had 6 games where he rushed the ball less than 8 times last year. He never rushed the ball less than 5 times, unless you count week 17 when he only played like one series or whatever it was. Had over 800 rushing yards on the season. And again, 3 of those 6 games came when he had that injured shoulder and he only rushed the ball 5 times each of those games. He is one of only 3 quarterbacks, and I'm not going to name one of them because I know he's your guy, but he's one of only 3 quarterbacks that I think could legitimately rush for 1,000 yards this season. And look, they added weapons in the passing game. They added A.J. Green. And look, maybe you think A.J. Green is dust, but he's better than their number 2 wide receiver last year, which was Christian Kerr, Larry Fitzgerald. I don't know, right? He's an upgrade over that. And they drafted Rondell Moore. So I think he could even get better in the passing game. So for me, all signs point to Kyler Murray as the overall QB1 this year.
You nailed it exactly. Look, the modern NFL, you need a quarterback with legs, somebody who can get you that weekly floor by rushing, but also, pile up those totals by getting yardage, but also touchdowns. And I absolutely see a path for Kyler Murray to be the QB1. But I'm going to go with another guy, actually, who fits that bill, and that is Lamar Jackson. No surprise, right? 2 years ago, he was the overall QB2. And I think that he can get back to that and be the QB1. Everything you mentioned with Murray, same holds true for Jackson. Added weapons in the receiving game, of course, drafting Rashad Bateman, who anybody who watched us before the draft knows he was my favorite wide receiver prospect in this class. Still is. I hate the team context he's in. Obviously, he's not going to get nearly as many targets, not as much love as he would on another offense. But he's still a great receiver. I think he can do a lot of things after the catch, and that's going to help Lamar Jackson, right? And so adding him, also adding Tylan Wallace, who was an underrated wide receiver prospect, Devin Duvernay stepping up, looking good in the preseason, somebody who's been slept on. So this offense is also wanting to pass the ball more. We've already heard rumors that they're working with Lamar Jackson to get him under center a little bit more and actually become a little bit more of, I hate to use this word, but traditional quarterback, but not just strictly working on the shotgun, being less predictable, opening up the offense. It's going to help his passing numbers, and the rushing numbers are already there. He did take a slight step back, about 25 yards per game less last year passing-wise, but that's not a huge difference week to week. If he can get that back and then some, which I know he can, look, there's no reason that he won't be the top quarterback because he's going to rush for over 1,000 yards. So I got Lamar Jackson, but Kyler Murray, actually have him right there also. All right, so who's number 1 for you? You agree, disagree? Let us know. Hit us up with a comment. And of course, check out our mock drafts each and every week where we see all sorts of different variations in ADP. Check out the link in the description below and join us. All right, thanks for watching.